Welcome to 20th Century Music and Arts. Today we're going to continue looking at why Black Sabbath is the most important band in rock history. In 1979, Ozzy stayed in Los Angeles and was holed up in a hotel room at the Le Parc Hotel with the curtains closed. The room was filled with empty cognac and whiskey bottles, beer cans, and overfilled ashtrays. One quick call, and the coke dealer would be come by with a small bag of white powder. This period of nihilistic indulgence lasted for 3 months. He would be visited by Sharon Arden, the daughter of Don Arden, the manager of Black Sabbath. She started encouraging him, noting that her father had actually initially wanted to sign Ozzy as a solo artist. These encouraging words, along with the fact that the two had become lovers, motivated Ozzy to get out of his slump. Ozzy and Sharon went about trying to put a band together. Irish guitarist Gary Moore helped him audition musicians. Eventually put a band together composed of former Uriah Heep drummer Lee Kerslake, former Rainbow bassist Bob Daisley, former Rainbow keyboardist Don Ari, and one very special guitarist, Randy Rhoads. Rhoads was born in Santa Monica, California on December 6, 1956. He grew up in a musical family, as both his parents were music teachers. He started playing guitar and progressed so quickly that his guitar instructor informed him that Rhoads had become so superior that he had nothing more to teach him. At age 16, Rhoads formed the band Little Women, which would eventually evolve into Quiet Riot. Quiet Riot would release 2 albums, but they only got released in Japan before the band would break up. Chicks in town been running around, they're on the loose. Let's all spread. Lead singer Kevin DeBro would put together a new lineup of the band in 1982, and the band would have a massively successful album, Metal Health, in 1983, and they would help spring forth the 80s hair metal movement. Rhoads was told by bassist Dana Strum, who would later play in the hair metal band Slaughter, that Ozzy was looking for a guitarist, and convinced Rhoads to go to the audition. During the tryout, Ozzy remained in the recording booth while Rhoads played. After only playing a few riffs, Rhoads got the job, which surprised Rhoads because he had only played a few riffs. But maybe what they heard was how adept Rhoads was as a player. Rhoads would take his classical training and apply it to the electric guitar, playing light, fast arpeggios and complicated riffs. Ozzy and his band, Blizzard of Oz, recorded the self-titled album at the Ridgewood Farm Studio in England from March 22nd to April 19th, 1980. Much of the musical songwriting was done by Daisley and Rose, and the band in the process created a groundbreaking heavy metal album. The album opens with the fiery I Don't Know, where Rhoads plays a guitar solo that matches anything in speed that Eddie Van Halen had ever done. This track is followed by the heavy and catchy Crazy Train, a song that would become his most famous of Ozzy's solo career. While the music is heavy, it is much more melodic than the riff-oriented music of Sabbath. Again, the solos by Rhoads push the boundaries of guitar virtuoso skills. The soft ballad Goodbye to Romance follows, which was apparently about Ozzy leaving Sabbath. Rhoads composed a solo classical guitar piece called D. That was the next track. And after is the riff-heavy Suicide Solution. This song was actually about how Bon Scott of AC/DC drank so much alcohol that he asphyxiated on his own vomit and died. Solution here being the liquid. This song would become infamous in 1984 after teenager John McCollum shot himself in the head after apparently listening to the song. The court case brought by McCollum's parents was thrown out on First Amendment grounds. The dark Mr. Crowley starts off side 2 and is actually a critique of English occultist Aleister Crowley. This track is followed by the poppy and rocking Noble Movies. The sad and melancholy Revelation Mother Earth is next, and the album ends with the heavy rockin' Steal Away the Night. When the album was released, the management decided it would be an Ozzy Osbourne solo album, and the name of the album would be Blizzard of Oz, not the name of the band. This situation would be a huge bone of contention for Lee Kerslake and Bob Daisley, who felt they would be cheated out of royalty. Crazy Train, released as a single, would eventually reach number 9 on the Billboard charts in 1981 and became Ozzy's most famous track. The band did a short European tour before going back to the studio again in 1981 to record the follow-up album, Diary of a Madman. It was recorded between February and March 1981. The album opens with the fierce Over the Mountain. Then is followed by the anthem Flying High Again. Next up is the epic You Can't Kill Rock and Roll, and side 2 ends with the intense Believer. The melodic Little Dolls opens up side 2 and is followed by the rocking ballad Tonight. Next up is the fast-paced SATO, and the album closes with the dark, epic title track. Kerslake and Daisley were let go by Sharon, who was now taking over Ozzy's management, because they complained were never given any money to live on during the recording of the album. A replacement band was brought in composed of Rhodes' fellow Quiet Riot member, bassist Ruby Serrazzo, and former Black Oak, Arkansas drummer Tommy Aldridge. They were actually credited on the album even though they did not play on it, and when Daisley and Kerslake sued Ozzy and Sharon in 1998 for unpaid royalties, Sharon had Robert Trujillo and Mike Borden re-record the bass and drum tracks. Fan outcry caused the original bass and drum tracks crediting Lee Kerslake and Daisley to be added back in the 2011 re-release. The band toured from November 5th, 1981 until August 8th, 1982. And there were a lot of events that happened during the tour. At a major label record signing at CBS Records, Ozzy and Sharon had a series of doves released into the air right inside the office. A very drunken Osbourne grabbed one of the doves and bit its head off. At a show in Des Moines, Iowa, a fan threw a live bat on stage, which Ozzy bit the head off thinking the bat was fake. He had to get a few rabies shots for that one. Osbourne was drinking so much that Sharon started hiding his clothes as a way to prevent him from leaving his hotel room. So one night in San Antonio, Texas, an undeterred Ozzy threw on his wife's nightgown and went to the bar. Unfortunately, Ozzy got arrested for urinating on the Alamo. On March 20th, 1982, the tour bus driver, Andrew Aycock, decided to take up makeup artist Rachel Youngblood and Randy Rose in a small aircraft because he was a pilot, while the rest of the crew and the band were asleep on the tour bus. Unfortunately, the wing of the airplane hit the tour bus, causing the plane to crash, killing all 3 on the plane instantly. Ozzy and the rest of the crew were devastated by the event. One only can wonder what sort of musical aspirations that Rhodes would have strived for after, then later in his career. But Osbourne had to keep it together on an appearance on Late Night with David Letterman only a week later. Ex-Gillan guitarist Bernie Tome was brought in, but after a few shows, it was apparent that his style would not match what the band was playing. So ex-Night Ranger Brad Gillis was brought in next. A live album had been planned before of Black Sabbath covers to combat the release of Live at Last. As mentioned in the last episode, it was an album released by Sabbath's former manager Patrick Meacham. At the time, Rose and Ulrich felt that the album would be a setback. Eventually, the show of all Black Sabbath songs was recorded at the Ritz in New York on September 26th to 27th, 1982. The shows had originally been planned at Toronto's Maple Leaf Gardens. The band played the last 3 songs, which were Iron Man, Paranoid, Children of Grave, very sloppily because they thought the songs would not be on the album. But in fact, those 3 songs did end up on the album. The album was released as Speak of the Devil and Talk of the Devil in the UK and had quite the frightening cover. During the tour for the album, there were a few lineup changes, which included Ruby Serrazzo joining Quiet Riot, and guitarist Jake E. Lee coming to join Ozzy's band. Black Sabbath were once again without a singer. They considered a variety of different frontmen, including Samson's Nicky Moore, Lone Star's John Sloman, former Deep Purple and Whitesnake singer David Coverdale, and even maybe Led Zeppelin's Robert Plant. They even got an audition tape from a singer named Michael Bolton. But manager Don Arden suggested that Ian Gillan, of the second incarnation of Deep Purple, join the band. After meeting Ian Gillan at the pub, and after several drinks with Iommi and Butler, Gillan was finally convinced to join. Now, the idea was to make this band a kind of supergroup, but pressure from Arden made them release the album as a Black Sabbath album. A newly sober Bill Ward was back in the band. The band went to the Manor studio of Richard Branson in May 1983 to record the album. The album was titled Born Again, and it had this demonic baby on the cover. The album has its moments, and one of the tracks, Zero the Hero, is really heavy and memorable. The video had a deformed scientist who brings to life a kind of Frankenstein monster who actually just looks like a tall nerd, who then the scientist proceeds to hand feed a British fry-up smothered in ketchup. But really, the concept of having Gillan sing didn't really work here because he was so well recognized for his work in Deep Purple. So imagine if Robert Plant had joined The Who or Mick Jagger had become the singer of the Beatles. The band even started playing Smoke on the Water as part of their encores. Gillan himself also felt his style did not really match the band's sound. As he states, "I was the worst singer Black Sabbath ever had. It was totally incompatible with any kind of music they'd ever done. I didn't wear leathers. I wasn't of that image. I think the fans were probably in a state of total confusion." And then there was the tour. A massive Stonehenge prop, which was actually the size of this real structure because the measurements had been communicated incorrectly, and it was actually 13 feet high, was placed on the stage. This situation would be the basis for the mini Stonehenge incident in the Ron Briner satirical movie Spinal Tap, except they create it with the opposite situation.
When we get the actual set, when we get the piece, it'll follow exactly these specifications. I mean, even these contours and everything.
I don't understand, Ian.
But I mean,
when the actual piece.
Well, when you build the actual piece.
But this is what you asked for, isn't it?
What?
Well, this is the piece.
This is the piece?
Yes.
Are you telling me that this is it?
Gillan could not remember the words to all these Black Sabbath songs, so he wrote them down on sheets, but he was unable to see them because the stage became engulfed in dry ice. So he had to lean down and look for them. Ward had gone back to heavy drinking and ended up checking himself into rehab, so Bev Behan, who had played in The Move and ELO, was brought in. Then Todd Arden had a dwarf dressed like the devil baby on the album cover. The dwarf would walk around the top of the Stonehenge while a tape of baby cries was playing. The dwarf would fall off the stage and land on a bunch of mattresses. The audience members, rather than thinking it was cool, were laughing hysterically at this spectacle. Unfortunately, during one of the shows, the mattresses were moved and the streaming continued after the tape of the baby cries were turned off when the dwarf hit the hard ground. Gillan would take part in the Deep Purple reunion the next year, and Geezer wanted to take some time off to be with his newborn son, so Sabbath would end up dissolving for a few years. In 1983, Ozzy went back to the studio to record the follow-up album, Bark at the Moon. Jakey Lee was now the permanent lead guitar player and did a good job filling Rhodes' shoes. Bob Daisley was brought in to help write the album, and Don Airey played keyboards again. Tommy Aldridge played drums on the album, the only one he would play on. The cover and the video had Ozzy dressed as a werewolf. The album sold very well, and despite Ozzy's antics, or maybe because of them, he continued to climb the ladder of success and leave his former band behind. Now, Sabbath was having a lot of influence on the world of heavy metal. The dark, evil imagery that had been an integral part of Sabbath's look and lyrical content had now spread throughout the metal genre. Such imagery was found in albums such as Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast, Motley Crue's Shout at the Devil, Witch Fiend's Give 'Em Hell, Demon's Night of the Demon, and Grim Reaper's See You in Hell. Even albums like AC/DC's Highway to Hell had parents worried as part of what was called the Satanic Panic. People were convinced that underground satanic cults were kidnapping children and that evil heavy metal bands were putting backwards messages on albums to convince their fans to engage in violent acts. Most of these claims were groundless, and the whole time period is considered to be ridiculous. But it was a hysteria that the media had got caught up in. If you want to see a document of this time, look up Geraldo Rivera's 1988 special Exposing Satan's Underground. Two bands that really embraced the dark imagery of hell were Venom and Merciful Fate. Venom from Newcastle, England, combined the speed of punk bands and Motorhead with the heaviness of Sabbath, along with the satanic themes. The band's logo was the pentagram, and their first three albums, Welcome to Hell, 1981, Black Metal, 1982, and At War with Satan, 1984, dealt with overtly satanic themes in a way that had never been done before in rock music. The band took the heaviness of Sabbath up a notch and would go on to be an influence on the genres of thrash metal, black metal, and death metal. Merciful Fate out of Denmark combined the heaviness of Sabbath and Judas Priest with lyrics about Lucifer expressed through the high-pitched vocals of the lead singer King Diamond. King Diamond appeared in makeup in the vein of Alice Cooper and Kiss, but with a more sinister countenance. Their albums, Melissa and Don't Break the Oath, would be influential on the black and death metal genres. King Diamond would form a new band using his namesake in 1985. Now, in 1983, would produce 4 furious albums that would push the heaviness of metal. The first 2 were from Canada. One was the third album by Anvil out of Toronto called Forged in Flames. The second was the pounding Heavy Metal Maniac by Exciter out of Ottawa. There were elements of Sabbath in these two bands, but the pace was much faster, and the two bands were part of an emerging speed metal genre. But the other 2 releases from that year really increased the intensity and heaviness. Metallica out of San Francisco created music that combined the technical skill of the new wave of British heavy metal bands with the intensity of hardcore punk and the thickness of Black Sabbath. The sound picked up where Symptom of the Universe left off. Their debut album, Kill 'Em All, was released in 1983 and was the heaviest album arguably released to date in music. Down in Los Angeles was Slayer. Slayer had similar influences to Metallica, but they embraced the dark satanic imagery of bands like Black Sabbath and Venom. They released the album Show No Mercy in 1983, and it was relentless in its evil brutality. Metallica and Slayer will be labeled as thrash metal. This genre would be the cornerstone of the metal underground in the 80s and would include other bands like Anthrax, Megadeth, Dark Angel, Testament, Exodus, and Overkill. All of these bands were indebted to Sabbath. But these thrash and speed metal bands were playing at a much faster pace than Sabbath had usually played at. But there started to emerge a genre that moved at a similar pace to Sabbath, and in some cases even slower, and this was called doom metal. There were 2 bands in the UK that wanted to keep that slower tempo pounding riffs of the early 70s Black Sabbath. Witchfinder General, possibly named after the 1968 film starring Vincent Price, was formed in 1979 in Stourbridge, England. They released 2 albums of Sabbath-influenced heavy metal, 1982's Death Penalty and 1983's Friend of the Devil. The album covers had images depicting rape, and this controversy blew up in the band's face, so they disbanded in 1984. Another band in a similar vein was Pagan Altar, and they actually only released one demo album in 1982, Judgment of the Dead. They would reform in the early 2000s and would play and release music until their singer Terry Jones died of cancer. Over in Sweden, Candlemass released their debut album, Epicus Doomicus Metallicus, in 1986, and that was actually dog Latin for epic doom metal, an apt description of their sound. For their follow-up album, Nightfall, they brought in the imposing singer Messiah Marcolin, who added an intense operatic vocal style. Over in America, there were many bands playing doom metal. Pentagram, whose history we looked at in episode 3 of the series, had released finally a self-titled debut in 1985, and then released the album Day of Reckoning in 1987. From Aurora, Illinois, came the band Trouble. They released 4 excellent albums of dark doom metal between 1984 and 1990. 1984's Psalm 9, 1985's The Skull, 1987's Run to the Light, and the 1990 self-titled album. What is interesting is that their singer Eric Wagner was a Catholic and was not down with satanic lyrics, so instead he wrote biblical-inspired lyrics with a Christian message. Wagner passed away from complications related to COVID-19 in 2021. Out of Arlington, Texas came Solitude Eternus, who released a great doom metal album, Into the Depths of Sorrow, in 1991. One band that took their name from a Black Sabbath song was St. Vitus. They played Sabbath-influenced music with all the heaviness and fuzz. They released a self-titled album in 1984 and Hallows Victim in 1985 before singer Scott Regers was to be replaced by Scott Wino Weinrich, who played on 3 albums, Born Too Late, 1986, Mournful Cries, 1988, and V, 1990. Wino had played with the band The Obsessed, who were a doom metal band who were adjacent to the Washington, D.C. hardcore punk scene and were well known to Henry Rollins and Ian Mackay. The Obsessed debut had been recorded in 1985, but was finally released in 1990, prompting Wino to return to The Obsessed, and they would release 2 more albums in the 1990s. Timeless carriage of ebony, distant marriage. Now, St. Vitus was actually signed to SST, the label run by Black Flag's Greg Ginn. Having St. Vitus on the roster made sense because Black Flag themselves were influenced by Black Sabbath despite being a hardcore punk band. After finally being released from their contract with Unicorn Records, which had prevented them from releasing albums, Black Flag released their second full-length album, My War, in 1984. The band had slowed down the tempo but kept the crushing heaviness the band was known for, and definitely injected the Sabbath sound into this recording, particularly on side 2. In fact, the band considered Black Sabbath to be far more influential on them than the Sex Pistols. And there were other punk bands that had taken cues from Sabbath, such as Void, Fang, and Flipper. Sabbath would go to continue to be a major influence on the bands in the American underground. We will look at that during the next episode. In 1985, the members of the original Black Sabbath got a chance to play together at Live Aid for the Philadelphia show. The show went smoothly, even though all of the members were drunk. They played Children of the Grave, Iron Man, and Paranoid. Ozzy and the members of Sabbath would go their separate ways, and during the next episode, we will look like how these members spent the rest of the 80s and the 90s. We are also going to continue to look at the mega influence that Sabbath would have, particularly on the music genres that developed in the 1990s. Thank you for listening to 20th Century Music and Arts. If you feel that I am wrong in saying that Black Sabbath is the most influential band in rock music history, please have an argument with me in the comments. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe, like, share, and comment. Thank you. See you next episode.